Welcome in, everyone. Today, we're diving deep into a case. It's chilling for sure, and sadly, way too common. The murder of Alexandra Dux.
You guys sent in articles, research, even your own notes on this case. And I gotta say, it's a real head scratcher.
Yeah.
But that's what we're here for, right?
Absolutely.
To unpack all this, before we get into it, let me introduce the brilliant mind joining us for this deep dive. Someone who can, help us connect the dots and really unpack this complex case.
Happy to be here, ready to dig in.
Perfect. So, Alexandra Dux, a young woman juggling a career. She was a systems analyst.
Right.
But also her true passions, acting and dancing. She was pursuing her dreams, living a full life, and then tragedy struck.
Yeah. It's always just awful when a life is cut short like that. But even more so in cases like Alexandra's. I mean, she was young, she was vibrant, and she clearly had so much potential.
Yeah.
It's that stark contrast that I think makes these cases so unsettling,
Absolutely. On May 19th, 2006, Alexandra was found murdered in her own home. We're not talking, some random act of violence here.
Yeah.
The details, and I'll spare you the worst of it, but they suggest something much more personal, almost enraged.
Yeah. No, you're right on the money there. The brutality of the crime scene, it often speaks volumes. You can tell a lot about the relationship between the victim and the perpetrator that way. And in this case, the level of violence really suggests a personal vendetta, almost like a need to inflict pain, beyond just silencing Alexandra.
It went way too far.
It did.
You shared some pretty chilling details about the murder weapons, the state of Alexandra's body when she was found by her mother. It's clear this wasn't some robbery gone wrong. This was personal.
Exactly. And that's what makes the initial stages of this investigation so fascinating. Because you see, with a crime, this personal investigators, they often start by looking at those closest to the victim.
Right.
The people who might have harbored resentment or jealousy, maybe even a desire for revenge.
Which brings us to Matthew Pugh, Alexandra's ex-boyfriend. And let me tell you, his background is anything but squeaky clean. You included some court records and news clippings that paint a pretty disturbing picture of this guy.
Yeah, and what's particularly concerning about Matthew's past, it isn't just the presence of violence, but this pattern of escalation. We see controlling behavior, verbal abuse, even physical assault against previous partners.
Wow.
This pattern, combined with this possessive personality, it suggests the dangerous potential for escalation, especially in the context of a breakup.
Right. We're not just talking about rumors here, right? You actually included excerpts from threatening letters. Like Matthew sent these to Alexandra after their split.
Those letters are chilling. In one, he writes, and I'm paraphrasing here, but he says something like, "If I see you with another man, I don't know what I'll do."
Oh, boy.
This wasn't just a heartbroken expressing his sadness. These were clear threats fueled by possessiveness and rage.
Talk about a giant waving red flag. So we've got this brutal crime, a suspect with a history of violence, and a very clear motive. Seems like an open and shut case, right?
Well, not so fast. While Matthew certainly fits the profile of a potential suspect, investigations rely on more than just suspicion and gut feelings. We need tangible evidence to connect him to the crime scene.
So we've got Matthew Pugh, right? This guy with his past, those letters, it's all pointing to a very bad dude. But like you said, suspicion isn't enough, right? We need hard evidence to put someone away.
Exactly. And that's where things get really interesting. The investigation didn't just focus on Matthew. You included some police reports, court documents, all about another person of interest, Jason Malone.
Ah, Jason Maloney, Alexandra's new boyfriend at the time. I gotta admit, when I first read that, I thought, here we go, the jealous new lover. You see that all the time.
Yeah, it's like a classic trope in these stories, isn't it?
Right.
And from an investigative point of view, they have to look at anyone who might have had a reason, however small.
Of course, gotta cover all the bases.
Absolutely.
And in Jason's case, things weren't looking so good, at least not at first. You noted that he was young, seemed nervous during questioning, and his alibi, well, it was a little shaky at first.
Sure, and you have to keep in mind, police officers, they're trained to notice these things. A suspect's demeanor, their initial story, it all paints a picture. And sometimes those initial impressions, they can be misleading.
Exactly. And as they dug deeper, Jason's alibi checked out. You included a really interesting detail about phone records actually placing him miles away from Alexandra's apartment when it happened. What a lucky break for him, huh?
It was. That phone record evidence, that was really crucial in clearing his name. And it kind of highlights how important it is to corroborate those witness testimonies with objective evidence. You never know.
You really don't. So Jason's off the hook, but we still don't have anything concrete on Matthew. You mentioned a piece of duct tape, a shoe print at the crime scene, but nothing that directly links him to it.
And that's where this case takes a frustrating turn. Despite all their efforts, the police couldn't find that smoking gun. The trail just went cold. You noted the case remained unsolved for years, which must have been just agonizing for Alexandra's family.
Oh, absolutely. Can you imagine the frustration, the heartache of knowing that the person who did this is still out there? They even offered a $50,000 reward. But even that, nothing really came of it. It seemed like they might never get justice for Alexandra.
It's a common fear in cases like these. As time goes on, memories fade, witnesses move on, that sense of urgency, it just diminishes. But as you know, this deep dive doesn't end there. Something happened in 2010 that completely changed the game.
Yeah, that's when things get really wild. Matthew's own cousin, Anthony Pugh, he contacts the police. We'll get into that bombshell he dropped and how it blew the case wide open right after a quick break. Don't go anywhere. All right, so we're back, and wow, things are about to get really, really interesting. Just a quick recap for everyone. We've got Alexandra, tragically murdered, her ex Matthew. Super sketchy dude, but the evidence just isn't there. Years go by, case goes cold, and then boom, Matthew's own cousin, Anthony Pugh, he calls to the police.
I mean, you flagged this part in your notes, and I gotta say, I see why. Oh, absolutely. I mean, this changes everything. You gotta remember that reward, the 50 grand, it hadn't brought in anything for 4 years. And then for Anthony, already knowing, carrying this weight around about his cousin, it must have been a lot. Maybe the reward, it kind of felt like it was time to finally do something.
And he did. According to the transcripts you shared, Anthony tells police Matthew actually confided in him about a plan to hurt Alexandra.
This is where it gets tricky. The prosecution really had their work cut out for them because, think about it, Matthew's lawyers, they jumped right on that. They were so quick to point out this whole thing hinged on Anthony's word.
Right, like what if he made it up?
Exactly, or maybe he misheard or exaggerated. It happens. There's always that question of personal bias.
Totally.
Yeah.
But they had more than just his word, right? What about that duct tape we talked about, found at the crime scene?
Oh, you're right. Seemed like a dead end at the time, but it's anything but. Anthony told police Matthew bragged about stealing a very specific type of duct tape. Industrial grade, unique adhesive from the factory he worked at making aircraft parts. Matthew thought it couldn't be traced back to him.
Oh, man. That's brazen.
It gets better, because guess what? They traced it. You included a whole forensic report, remember?
Oh, yeah.
The tape at Alexandra's apartment, exact match to the kind from Matthew's factory. If that's not a smoking gun, I don't know what is.
So they finally have enough to arrest him, right?
Yeah.
What did Matthew say when they confronted him with this? What was his defense?
Well, there's no confession, no eyewitnesses, so his lawyers, they went for the classic strategy. Poke holes. They said Anthony made it up for the money, or twisted Matthew's words. They kept bringing up the lack of DNA evidence.
So it's basically a he said situation then. How did the jury decide?
You have to give it to the prosecution. They did a really good job. They took all these different pieces, the letters, the witness statements about Matthew stalking Alexandra, and of course that duct tape evidence. They put it all together to argue for premeditation.
It's like a puzzle.
Exactly.
What about Alexandra's family? This whole thing I can't even imagine.
You included some of her mother's statements from the trial, heartbreaking stuff, the pain of losing a child, the wait for justice. It's unimaginable. I don't know if anything can truly heal that, but at least there's some closure.
So the verdict?
Guilty. First-degree murder. Matthew Pugh was sentenced to 80 years, no parole.
Wow, 80 years. That's a long time. Justice, but a tough pill to swallow,
Absolutely. This case, it just goes to show how dangerous obsession and jealousy can be. How quickly things can escalate. But it's also a testament to, good police work, to never giving up, following every lead, no matter how small.
Well said. This one was definitely a heavy one, but it's so important to talk about these things,
Yeah.
to learn how to spot those red flags, to trust our gut, and most importantly, to speak out against violence wherever we see it.
100%. We have to keep having these conversations, no matter how difficult, if we want to make a difference.
Couldn't agree more. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. It's been quite a journey. And to everyone listening, thank you for sending in this case and for caring enough to really dig into these issues. It matters. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. But until then, take care.